I am calling the Lunenburg Finance Committee to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Facebook Public Access page. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link attached in the agenda posted on the town calendar. From a telephone, please dial toll-free 888-475-4499. This agenda lists all topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any announcements from the committee? All right. I just have one, and that's a correction from our meeting last week. We were invited by Mr. Jeffries to attend, I believe it's March 7th, the meeting with the select board and the local delegates, our local representatives. I was under the impression that it was not for the full meeting, but for the full committee, but it is absolutely for the full committee and for the school committee to attend as well. So that is, well, we'll put it on the schedule for one of our meetings, I guess probably coming up pretty soon here, that we'll have to kind of brainstorm some ideas. So I'll start throwing it on for probably the 23rd and the 2nd. But that's March 7th. It will be a 75-minute session that we'll have with the representatives for the with the select board, the school committee, and the finance committee all together. With that, is there any public comment from the committee? Hearing none, any public comment from the public? Mr. Beardmore.
Good evening, Peter Beardmore, 282 Pleasant Street. Pleasure to see you all tonight. Chris, it's been a long time. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge, as I did an email to all of you following your last meeting a few weeks ago, that my contemporaneous remarks last week on the capital plan relative to the 2 trucks was actually incorrect. Yes, we do need 2 trucks. But relative to the other 2 trucks that are out of commission, those 2 trucks have been, in fact, on previous capital plans and have been ordered and are back ordered. So the 2 trucks that are on the capital plan for FY24 represent an additional 2 trucks, which would likely go on back order when they were put on order. And that may or may not affect your thinking relative to the next item on the capital plan, on the priorities list, number 7, which is the fire alarm system for Turkey Hill Elementary. I know the capital plan is on your agenda for tonight, and I would encourage you to go through it as you see fit. But I do want to call out, which was not brought up in the previous meeting where the town manager presented the capital plan, that she has done some considerable reprioritization of items that fall between items 7 and 29. And at some point, if more funding does become available, if less free cash is needed to backfill the overlay account, based on what happens over the next few months, some of that prioritization may become very important as we draw the line between some of those numbers. So that may be relevant for some discussion tonight. I've also inquired of the chairman of the capital planning committee, who I believe is on vacation, and I haven't heard back from on that. So anyway, just wanted to bring that to your attention, and thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, moving on, town manager report.
Good evening.
There.
Just a couple updates, and I don't know if any of you saw the select board's meeting. So I gave these updates as well. Budget updates. We have a projected deficit in the health insurance line this year. So that's due to changes in enrollment for both active and retiree. And so, but the finance director and I have identified sources of funds where we'd have projected surpluses that would be able to cover that deficit this year. The fiscal 23 snow and ice budget is currently over by approximately $170,000, and that's mainly due to our dependence on contractors this year, doing with 4 out of our 7 trucks out of commission, and the increase in rates for those contractors, as well as the increase in the cost of salt this year over last year. It increased about over 12%. For our primary vendor, we use 2 vendors for salt. So I met with the finance director, DPW director, and we reviewed our accounts within DPW. And primarily, we would depend on the pavement management plan line item. We do have about $400,000 left this year in that account. This is not the debt exclusion. This is within the operating budget line. So that would be where we would be looking to do within the budget. That was really the main area where we had the most funds. And we will have surplus in our salary line as well in the DPW. So there's about $60,000 we can transfer from that to cover snow and ice. But knowing that it's only February and sometimes our snow season goes until March or April, foresee that growing, obviously.
How would that affect our pavement management plan if we had to pull 100K out of it?
So it would be more than that. Because
110 at worst. Well, assuming we don't get a single snowstorm
right,
from here
which
on
is
out.
probably very unlikely.
But how bad did you speak to the DPW director about that, specifically about how it would adversely affect our management plan?
So we do have an updated pavement management plan from the company we hired to do that. There is a lot of, I think it was fog line painting that needs to be done this year. So there is, and that's not a lot of money they spent. There is, I think, 2 roads that would be more than we have in the pavement management line. So that would be the potential impact to that. But that's where we looked for within the budget.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Don't we usually take that out of free cash at the end of?
Not lately. We've been doing interdepartmental end of the year transfers for that. We have in the past free cash.
Snow and ice can be carried over, right?
We can deficit spend. That's the
Yeah.
only account we can legally deficit spend, but we have to raise that money at town meeting.
Yeah, isn't that usually out of free cash?
The last couple of years, we have not. We've done transfers within the operating budget to cover it. We've had surpluses. We've been able to cover the deficit. But last year, I think the deficit was $170,000 for the entire year. And we're at this point in the season already at that number. But in years prior to that, maybe 3-4 years ago, I think we used free cash. But that is an available fund that you can cover snow and ice deficit.
Okay.
Any other questions? No. Is that it?
Yes.
An easy one.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Brochu, anything to report for this evening?
Miss Lemieux has me covered. I'm all set.
Excellent. All right, moving on to the capital plan. So I'm keeping this in here in the same way that I'm keeping the tax assessment and abatement discussion in here as well as placeholders, just so we can kind of continue the conversations without breaking open meeting law. So I'm trying to put a couple items in here to carry the conversation. The biggest one of note came from the select board, and that is to potentially use ARPA funding to cover the spending, the cost of both DPW trucks as well as the ambulance. It would only be able to be used for those funds. So we wouldn't be able to, or for those items, we wouldn't be able to use it for anything else specifically in that, or it wouldn't free up any additional cash to spend on other items in there. Because I believe, Madam Town Manager, we would eventually have to pay ourselves back for that funding, right? Correct? The ARPA funding, if we choose to spend it now on the DPW trucks, we would effectively be paying ourselves back at town meeting by appropriating for the capital plan.
No, so the ARPA funding, once the select board makes that decision, we go ahead and make those purchases, we just come right from that account.
Okay. Okay, so we would,
What you're asking is, the town made an appropriation at town meeting, can we rescind that and use ARPA funding?
correct.
And that answer is yes.
Okay.
Like it can be, the appropriation can be changed at a future town meeting.
Okay. So I suppose and I've asked you this question over email, but I just want to get it out there as well. If we were to use ARPA funding for those 3 vehicles, how does that affect the capital plan at this point?
All across the room. So the plan that I presented recommends using the $986,000 from the special purpose stabilization fund that was created to buy large ticket items, vehicles and equipment for that purpose. So going further down the plan, there's no items that meet that criteria. It's not like that 986. I would recommend moving the plan further down. That's something, the town meeting can make that change. You can change the purpose. Town meeting, they have that right to do at town meeting, but that wasn't the intent of that account.
So if we
So
were to
it
use-
would only, it wouldn't change the capital plan at this point in time. It would be 3 projects instead of 6 projects.
Got it, okay.
None of which are coming from free cash.
Correct. Right now, we're reserving free cash for the overlay.
Okay. So all we're getting ourselves at this point with potentially using ARPA funding is a head start on purchasing those vehicles, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think it was Mr. Jeffries that brought it up about, he was the one that had mentioned paying ourselves back. So we could effectively at town meeting reappropriate, use that money from the special stabilization fund to refund the spending that we did on the ARPA funding. Can we do a line item transfer at that point to recoup the money, in other words?
No.
No.
Okay.
Special stabilization requires a higher vote,
Two-thirds.
2/3 vote, right?
Vote. Yep. 2/3 vote.
Okay.
So it would have to be its own article number, or it would,
Within the capital plan?
if you were gonna use special purpose stabilization for
For
the
the
capital project, would it just mean when you present the capital project, we need to go to a 2/3 vote?
Yes.
Or that you would have your own line item for those
2/3 vote for the capital plan article.
in its entirety?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions about, go ahead.
Well, so I have a question in general related to the overlay surplus. I just kind of wanted, and I sent an email,
I saw it, yeah, with the IGR. On
yeah,
it.
just doing some research, trying to
Yep.
understand
No, that was a good
I think it's our
overview.
first time having to do this, maybe
Ever?
as long as you've been here at least.
Yeah.
So this is like extra credit from the perspective of learning finance committee, right?
Right.
But I just kind of wanted to understand that process a bit. And it seems like it's going to kind of come into where we go on the capital plan. But I don't know if you want to talk about that now or at the next topic, because there seems to be an entire procedure related to asking the assessor for how much is a deficit and
Right,
and
so,
multiple ways potentially of funding an overlay deficit. And I don't know if you've had enough time or if this is new to you as well, but at some point I want to
I
understand
can
that process. and the
generally answer
options.
questions, yeah. So the overlay is something that is determined, or the amount to estimate for the overlay is determined during the budget process. So every year, how much we need to cover potential exemptions, ATB cases that may be coming up, that we may need to pay out those amounts. So that's an amount that's really determined by the assessors, what we need in that account to cover any liabilities, basically. So, and it's not voted on at town meeting. It's something that's raised on the tax recap sheet that's submitted when we set our tax rate. So the assessors have the ability to make that a vote on their own, so outside of town meeting. So, for instance, this year, we budgeted $120,000 in the budget for the overlay, and it came in, they raised $116,000 and some odd dollars in the overlay to cover what was needed. So what situation we're in right now, to determine the extent of what we need in the overlay. There would be two options. It can be appropriated at a town meeting or raised as a deficit on the recap in the fall. My recommendation, obviously, would be to do this at town meeting. Then it can be released by the assessors as surplus if not needed at a future date.
So that other option, does that just mean that, say we had $1 million deficit
Yep.
in that overlay account, that the tax levy would in essence automatically go up by $1 million and then get included into the tax rate for next year?
No, we have to, just like snow and ice, we have to come up with a source of funding to cover that. So at town meeting, where we vote snow and ice deficit, and Karen can jump in anytime, to cover that deficit. So we usually do within the operating budget, free cash, available sources. This would be approached in the same manner.
Okay. Because they laid out, it seemed like through this, a few ways in which to handle that deficit.
The raising it on the recap is the other, I think, alternative that they discussed.
Okay, which I don't really understand.
But if you raise it on the recap, it's still gonna become, part of this year's budget process, just like Heather said with snow removal. If we have a snow removal deficit that we're not able to cover within existing appropriations, then we would have to deal with that deficit through the FY24 budget process and determine a funding source in order to eliminate that deficit. The overlay would be the same thing, and right now, with everything that is going on with the assessment issue, Heather has determined that she would want to reserve that free cash in order to fund that potential deficit. So, like she said, if we had $1 million left in that account after all was said and done, then the assessors would just declare that as a surplus, and it would become available for appropriation at an upcoming town meeting.
Okay, so maybe I missed this when I watched last week, but the current plan is to take all free cash and put it into that
No,
overlay
I'm
account?
reserving, making a recommendation on any use of free cash until we have a clearer picture of what our extent of liability is.
Okay, do you have is there any timeline by which, I mean, you now have, to some extent, you have some data, right? You may know if there was, you may have a guess as to, or the assessors may have a guess as to whether there was, I hate to call it an error, but, you know, that there was overcharging.
So timeline, I would say we're drilling down into that now. So I would hope within a week to 2 weeks, I'd have a recommendation on what we should be putting into the overlay.
Okay, so in this guideline that I read, and I don't pretend to understand all the words even, never mind the process, it says that you actually request that from the assessor?
To release the surplus.
The
If it-
overlay would
yeah.
be, if we have an overlay deficit, it doesn't require anything from the assessor's office really, because when the balance sheet is submitted to the state, they would see that deficit and would want to know how we plan on addressing that. Because like I was just saying, just like snow removal, if we have a deficit at the close of the fiscal year in our overlay account, then that becomes an unprovided for abatement and exemption account, and it's a deficit fund balance that needs to be addressed. So the only time that the assessors are really involved is if they have overlay and there is a surplus, then it requires the board to vote to declare that surplus. And once they do that, then it is an available fund for appropriation.
That would again have to be voted at a town meeting to appropriate that available surplus.
Otherwise, it would just stay in the surplus.
It would stay in the overlay if
overlay
they don't
surplus.
release it.
Do we have a final count for the number of abatement requests that have been filed since we're 9 days after the deadline?
I think it was 427 or in.
Okay. And are we going to be getting, since we're now meeting weekly, are we going to be able to kind of ask how the process is going in terms of not obviously specifics to individual households, but at least kind of total amounts that have actually been approved or denied
By the assessors?
by whomever is actually running through it? I know they're hiring
That's-
out other people and other.
Well, the Board of Assessors are the ones that make the
Make the final
final
call.
vote on abatement applications.
Okay.
I would have to check with them.
Okay.
I don't know when that becomes public, because all those meetings are in executive session when they review applications.
I think it would be, at least on my end, it would be nice to have it as sort of just an ongoing report to say, so far we've gone through 27 or whatever, and we've, granted or denied X amount, or just total amount, so we kind of get an idea as to what we're going to be looking at for a deficit or an overlay or whatnot, if that's possible.
I guess I just don't see how there's any timeline between now, well, the warrant closes when, in April?
March 20th,
March 20th, so I don't know what today is.
The 9th,
the
The
9th.
9th, so 5 weeks, 6 weeks,
40 days.
40 days. I mean, do we have a chance of knowing in 40 days what we think that,
The full extent,
yeah,
no, because the deadline would be May 1st. If you're going by the February 1st date for 90 days that they have to review the last application that came in. So, and then there's the potential if people do get, are denied, they have the ability to appeal to the ATB, which is further out.
How long, is there a timeline associated with that?
There is a timeline. I don't know off the top of my head what that timeline is with the ATB.
Would that be then probably along the timeline of special town meeting?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think it's important for us to understand the likely, dates associated with understanding the budget implications of all this. I know you don't know today.
Yeah. And the ATB, it may depend on their schedule of hearing dates too. So there may not be a definitive date. But I'll look into that.
Are we able to request the total amount requested at all? If we sum up all of the requested abatements, just to get an idea as to, I realize that if the abatement is approved, it's not going to just wipe out all the tax debt, or the tax requirement from that household. But at least it would give us a ballpark of what we're looking at for. Are we talking $1 million? Are we talking $100,000? At least what order of magnitude we're in.
Well, that would be my, the number that I'd be recommending would be a conservative estimate to the town to what you should cover for, if all abatements were approved.
Okay.
Does the homeowner request what theirs should be, or do they only request that there is a reduction?
There is a field where they can request their estimated value, opinion of value, but that doesn't mean that everyone fills out that.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it would be good to understand, from the perspective of the budget, best case, worst case.
I'll give you the
most
worst
likely.
case scenario, guaranteed.
Can you subtract 10% off of that?
I think Karen can, confirm that as well. That's how I'm approaching it.
Okay.
Worst case scenario.
You said there was 400 something? I'm sorry.
427, I think. I could be off by one or two.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still rather concerned about what it's going to look like in 40 days and how we're going to proceed through appropriation at town meeting with a whole bunch of unknowns, with decision dates going out another month past. It's just, I worry about what that's going to do for our final numbers that we know of. And I mean, we're talking a substantial chunk of our, the presentation I'm giving, our tax levy brings in 66% or 63% of our total revenue for the town.
Mm-hmm. The impact is to our, this year's certified free cash. You have to remember that, which in essence then affects the recommendation for the capital plan. But, the tax levy for fiscal '24, that number is not going to change. We levy what we can, the 2.5%. That's not determined by the valuations.
But what happens if the abatements are approved?
That would come out of the overlay, which we would appropriate funding at town meeting from free cash.
Do we have enough to cover all of that in free cash, potentially, in a worst case scenario?
I will tell you when I give that.
Okay.
So just process-wise, again, if, say we put all free cash towards this abatement, and worst case from the budget perspective is that, it's still $500,000 insufficient to all the abatements that are approved.
If
What
it were
happens then?
insufficient,
Yeah.
we would have to take it from another source, which my next recommendation would be from stabilization.
But you would
If
likely
anything's
not,
a rainy day, this is a rainy day.
no,
So-
but you would likely not know that. So say you put all free cash towards this, and we go to town meeting, it's all approved, sits there, but at the end of the day, there's still more abatements processed than what is in that
That's why I'm giving
overlay.
you worst-case scenario for town meeting. So we will appropriate our worst-case scenario.
Okay.
Any other questions regarding this? We're kind of bridging the two topics together.
No, I mean, to me, I'm just saying 427 times a couple thousand, you get to 850,000. So, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good estimate or not, but just trying to get a round number.
Yeah.
To think about.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You want me to stay
Thank you.
here for anything?
Sure. So, kind of getting back to the capital, I want to round the rest of that out before we get over to the tax assessment and abatement completely. Are there any other questions or comments for the town manager in the recommendation of the select board using ARPA funding to cover those three expenses, or any other of the presentation that was offered before?
And I have to just say, I may not be able to answer. That's the board's decision of
It was
how to
a
use
right,
ARPA,
it
not
was a
my
suggestion,
decision. so-
Right, it was merely a suggestion by
Yeah,
Chairman Alonso. It wasn't
yeah,
voted on or anything.
right.
So right now on the table for ARPA funding is this 948, what else is?
986,000.
986, what else has been?
Pending
either-
for ARPA requests. I think we had outside, well, that included the ambulance, was 500,000. It was about 5.2 million, I think, in requests that we had. So add on another 480,000.
But
Because
how
the
much did we
DPW
get?
trucks weren't included in that number, in the 5.2 million. So,
Has anything else been voted on? I haven't been following all
No.
the meetings,
No.
the select board meetings.
they have not voted on commitment of those funds yet. They've been discussing it. And it will be discussed again on the 21st. And capital planning is meeting next week.
In preparation for that? Or just in general terms?
And to discuss the capital plan as presented.
Okay.
What were we awarded for
You have a meeting coming up.
ARPA?
Sorry?
How much were we awarded for ARPA funding?
3.5, some has been expended on COVID-related things already, but not a large amount.
So we have 4.8 million in requests, but we have 3.5.
5.2 million in requests.
And 3.5 in funding.
I think that's it for us.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So moving on to tax assessment and abatement. I sent out a short presentation that I put together as quickly as possible. And by no means being an expert in the field at all. Madam Town Manager, feel free to correct anything that I say that's incorrect in this one. But I put a presentation together on, let me bring it up first. On an attempt to kind of give the public a general idea for our town revenue and on Proposition 2.5. Watching the select board meeting this past Friday, or this past week, Tuesday, there were a couple questions regarding Prop 2.5 and how their individual, how the understanding seemed to come across as that my property tax should only increase 2.5% per year, and that's a common misconception. And I was already kind of kicking around the idea, and then we had Mr. Beardmore come up last week and make a suggestion as well, and I think that kind of settled it for me between those two. So just to kind of run through a general process we have, I'm just going to look at just how our town revenue comes in and then a quick overview of just the three categories of a levy ceiling, a levy limit, and just the town levy itself. And then the exceptions to those being overrides, debt exclusion, and effectively capital purchases. So our town revenue, I'm going to use FY22 numbers because I pulled them directly from the town manager's report last year. We had preliminary 23 numbers, but the 22 numbers were pretty well locked in place at this point. So these are the actual numbers that we had. So our total revenue was just over 47 million. Out of that, our property taxes, our levy, came in at just under 30 million. So 63.4% of our total revenue came in from our levy. After that, we had cherry sheet offset, state aid, 9.4 million. We had our local receipts of 3 million. We have other category, which is 2.3 million. That's our free cash, that's unexpended articles, some reimbursements, trust funds, and whatnot. And then we have our enterprise funds at 2.5 million. Those are our solid waste, water, sewer, etc. So as I was saying before, our taxes bring in 63%, almost 2/3 of our entire revenue that the town uses to function is brought in through our own individual property taxes. So that is a sizable chunk. So the Proposition 2.5 was voted into, I believe, in 1980. And the way that it basically works is it limits the amount that a town or municipality can actually levy or tax its citizens for their property or for their real estate or personal property. And the idea is that you have three levels. You have the ceiling, which is the maximum allowable levy limit, and that is based on the total property value in the town. So let's say you have $1 billion worth of assessed value, nice and simple round number. You multiply that value by 2.5%, and that's $25 million. That is your levy ceiling. That is effectively the limit that you can really go up to. You can actually get up a little bit above that, but that's meant to be sort of a hard deck that you can't go across without a lot of work. Below that is the levy limit itself. So the levy limit is the maximum that we can levy in a year without an override. And an override requires a vote at town meeting as well as a ballot vote to accomplish that. So this gets a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. I just picked FY12 and FY13. These are not actual numbers at all. But let's say that the way that the levy limit is calculated is it's based upon the previous year's levy limit. So you have to already have an existing number there. So let's say last year's levy limit was, let's pull out a pointer. Let's say last year's levy limit was 10 million. You get to automatically increase that by 2.5% right off the bat. So you add on $250,000. In addition, you have a category for new growth, and that's relatively self-explanatory. That wasn't there the previous year, it's there now, so it can be added to the levy. Lastly, you have debt exclusions, whether they be capital or debt or whatnot. But those get added into it as well, and that's on a yearly basis, basically, and I'll get into what those are a little bit later. So add all of these up, and your total levy amount that you can tax up to is $10.5 million for this example in FY13. You then have the actual levy. So this is the revenue itself that's generated by real and property taxes directly from the Lunenburg residents. It cannot surpass the levy limit or the ceiling without a town vote or ballot vote. Now, depending upon your exclusions, depending upon your new growth, there is technically the possibility that your levy limit could actually be higher than your levy ceiling. For example, if you have $30 million worth of exclusions in 1 year for whatever reason, you're going to spike that right back up. So you choose the lower of the two numbers in that case. So to surpass that, you would need to vote in an override, which takes, I believe, a two-thirds vote at town meeting and a ballot question as well. So that it's difficult to do, but basically this number then becomes the amount that the assessors work with. They go out, they take their evaluations, and they decide a tax rate That is the amount per $1,000 that every household in the town will spend. There's two options of doing it where they can split out residential from commercial and have two different levy rates per thousand. Historically, we have not done that. We've just kept it as a single rate. But the idea there is to offset it if we had a large commercial presence in town. In theory, we could offset our levy for residents by increasing the levy for commercial businesses. It was presented in November as an option, but like I said, historically, precedent is that we don't do that. We keep a single tax rate in town, and that was continued in November as well. Of note, though, is this bottom one. If the valuations increase, the levy rate must decrease to keep the levy under the levy limit. And that is the reason why our rate last year, I believe, was $17.10 per thousand, and this year is $14.62 per thousand. And that is because if we were to levy at $17.10 per thousand, we would go right past whatever our levy limit was actually going to be. So we can't do that. So, going into those exclusions, the overrides, debt exclusions, capital exclusions. So the override is a simple one. It just allows the town to levy over the levy limit for whatever reason they may have, whether that's to purchase something or for any number of reasons. They may have, they may decide that they have this project that needs to be done. We need an extra $500,000. We can present to the town, here's what we're doing, here's why we want to do it. We're going to request an override for that. The caveat is that if an override is passed, it permanently increases the levy limit. You can't take it away right away. It does not just come off the next year. It sits on there the entire time until you vote an underride to remove it from the levy limit. So I can't imagine that it would be too difficult to imagine a scenario where if we did have to do an override, we would immediately do an underride the next year. But it is worth noting that if we ever do decide to do an override, it's stuck in there for all intents and purposes until we get another 2/3 vote at the next meeting. Debt exclusions, those allow the town to, again, levy over the limit without having to do an override. Historically, we have the Public Works building, the Public Safety building, the primary school, the middle high school. All of these are expenses that allow us to levy beyond our limit, and they exist for the life of the debt. Once the debt falls off, they fall off the levy limit as well. The last one is capital exclusions. We don't currently have any of these, but those are effectively, if you wanted to, you could in theory levy beyond your levy limit and say, we want to buy $1 million fire truck. We don't have it in our capital funds, so we can appropriate it out of a levy by doing effectively an override that is an exclusion. We don't have any. So the big takeaways for Prop 2.5 is that our town taxes, high as they may be, they do account for 2/3 of our total town revenue. It's funding our schools, it's funding our fire department, it's funding everything else. But it doesn't mean it's perfect. Again, the calculation of your maximum levy is the previous year's levy limit, 2.5% added on that, plus new growth, plus any debt exclusions. So and also the levy rate per thousand is recommended by the assessor's office and approved by the select board. It's not the assessor that sets it, it is set officially by the select board, I believe. The levy rate, the tax rate, is set by the select board.
They're defined as a single or split tax rate.
But the rate itself is set by the select.
Rate is determined by how much is raised at town meeting and final budget numbers.
Right. Okay. The maximum 2.5% levy increase is on the total levy. It's not on individual properties, it's not on individual businesses, it is on the total amount, the total assessed amount value of the town. And based on home valuations, individual levies can and will vary from property to property. Clearly, we're seeing that this year, which is why we have 427 plus or minus abatements being filed. I have a couple links here off to mass.gov that are very useful links if anybody would like them. I'm not sure how we can put this out if need be, but it can certainly be shared. I have no problem with that. But you can easily look up.
Public record right now.
Well, you can't click on the link. Only I can. But searching for these two, Prop 2.5 Primer and the Division of Local Services website in general, are very good resources for information on Prop 2.5.
There's a series of YouTube videos that go over it that do a really good job as well.
There are. I watched those last week to get ready for this. That was my entry. That was my crash course. So effectively, yeah, that's basically what I've got. I'm happy to discuss it at all if there's any clarifications or questions, and I'm happy to, again, Madam Town Manager, if there's anything that was misspoken or incorrect on this, I'm happy to change. I'll change this to clarify what the select board is actually voting on, whether it's a split levy or a singular levy. And that it's the town that actually applies, or that sets the levy limit, or the rate, I should say.
It's a number of factors, and maybe if you look at a tax recap, that might help kind of break it down.
Okay.
Or, like the overlay is added into that total.
Mm-hmm.
So that final number is what we need to, as our entire budget, including those amounts that aren't voted at town meeting, is what determines the tax rate.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Any questions or follow-up on this? Fantastic.
So I do want, I guess one thing I want to kind of ask or clarify, and there's been some Facebook, obviously, posts. What else is there, right? But it talks about the fact, there was an example cited where someone stated their tax rates doubled. And the example they said is in quarter 1 and 2, I'm going to use arbitrary numbers here, it was $1,000 each quarter. And then in quarters 3 and 4, it went to $2,000. But that's, part of that increase is to account for what was, quote, underpaid in quarter 1 and 2, right? So in that scenario, was 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 2,000. If it had been right, it should have been 1,500, 1,500, 1,500, 1,500, right? So
First 2 quarters are estimated.
estimated,
The second 2 are actual.
right? So,
The total.
so one should not expect that if they had a significant increase from quarter 2 to 3, that next year, all things being equal, quarter 1 would go down from quarter 4.
Correct. That's all things being.
All things being equal. And, yeah.
Say that last one again, Chris?
So again, so let's use the example of $1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 2,000. Total is $6,000. What should have been is $1,500 per quarter. But because it was estimated and there was a fairly drastic increase in that example, it was 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 2,000. If nothing changed, say there was no appreciation or whatever, right? Next year, it should be estimated that it's 1,500
Yeah.
per quarter. So taxes didn't double in that case. It doubled from 2 to 3, but that was to account for the estimation in quarter 1 and 2. So that's kind of I don't know, it's an important thing to understand in this factor.
It was a 50% increase in that case,
Right.
instead of a 100% increase.
And I just want to be clear, Chris, because I think their taxes doubled. It's not the tax rate that doubled, right?
Well, in that case, the taxes went up by 50%.
Taxes, not the tax rate.
The tax
Right.
rate.
Different.
Right.
Tax rate was the same, the valuation. increased.
Valuation is what changed and changed the taxable amount. Right. But the rate stayed the same?
Yes. Well,
Or it was
Rate
maybe a
went
no,
minor?
the rate went down.
Down.
Rate went
Per
down.
1,000 rate, down.
Right, okay.
17 something to 14 something.
But the valuation for a number of people went up quite a bit.
Average valuation across the town, average went up by over 20% or
20%.
something, right? Therefore, the rate went down by,
Right.
right. Yeah, so there's definitely no windfalls. I think people think that there's a windfall coming because individuals went up, but no, it's just your proportion. Everyone likes to say, pay your fair share, right, until the fair share is higher, so
But whether or not it was done, how it looks, I guess the optics of it, when you compare, there are people in town whose taxes did go down, and I'm sure that's the minority. Just as I'm sure that we have, just under 3,600 total households in Lunenburg, I believe?
3,600? No, it's more like
5,000.
5,000.
Oh, 5,000? Oh, I don't know where I got 3,600 then. All right, so we had just under, 8% of homes filed an abatement. So it's not the majority of homes that were overcharged. It's not the majority of homes that diminished. It's, you've got your nice little bell curve, and you've got these sections out there at the 0.5% on each end that are going up a lot, and they're going down a decent amount as well. But yes, it is not the rate that changes. The rate did change, but that was a planned change. The valuations, and primarily the land valuations, are what went up so substantially. Not the building valuations. At least, again, according to Facebook.
Yep.
I'm sure we have abatement records that we'll see a little bit more granularity on.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I think I know the answer to this, but it's come up in some online conversations as well, so out of curiosity. When we talk about the levy being whatever the levy is for current fiscal year 2023, which translates into taxes and tax bills, some of those taxes and tax bills are very likely to be abated and lessened, which will be covered by an overlay account through much of the mechanics that the town manager has just outlined. But to clarify, the levy doesn't change. There's a lot of mechanics underneath it that will change and will move and be somewhat malleable this year in particular, but the levy itself doesn't change. So to the town manager's point, when we're budgeting for FY24 and budgeting to the levy limit, we're just budgeting based on the FY23 levy, and it's times 1.025, or, and away you go. So there'll be a lot of work that the assessors will have to do in the aftermath of this to kind of figure out how we're applying the assessments for FY24, and that may affect everybody's property as a result of what happened this year, but the levy does not change as a result of abatements or what we're going through right now with the current crisis. Is that everybody's understanding?
The ceiling would change.
Well, you just said the levy, though.
Right, I'm just kind of stepping down through the processes. The ceiling would change because the assessed values would potentially change.
No.
Not this year.
No, the levy is the levy.
No, even the levy.
Ceiling is a different topic.
Yes, ceiling, you can't.
Which we're not near.
Exceed
That
your
would be
ceiling.
$25 per thousand, so we're not there.
Right, and then the limit itself would not change because it's based on last year's and new
Levy,
growth.
right.
And 2.5% more.
Right.
And that's what we're
Unless-
allowed to levy
Right.
for taxes.
And then that determines, and then since we levy effectively up to the limit, plus or minus I think it's minus a couple thousand usually. Our levy capacity is only like a couple
It's-
$1,000s
Right,
historically.
there's a little buffer.
So
Right.
theoretically, I'm just kind of taking this to the logical conclusion, is that if we can contain the current crisis to the current fiscal year that we're living in, this shouldn't carry forward into FY24. I understand it creates some budgeting challenges for capital planning and free cash and that kind of thing, but theoretically, this should be contained to the current fiscal year and not carry forward into the next budget year.
Wait, so any control, it's like a control system going on here almost, right? What's gonna happen though is if lake properties go down in value, others are gonna go up, proportionally.
Taxes, yeah,
Proportion,
fair
your
point.
proportion is
Yeah,
gonna go
yeah.
up.
So,
Others
fair-
are gonna
fair
get
point.
an increase in.
Yes, fair point.
taxes next
My
year.
question was contained to the budget. But your point is well taken. It may have an effect on everybody's tax bill next year
Right.
as a result of what's happening this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your tax rate would likely change.
Your
And the tax rate would likely
Yeah,
change as a
tax
result
is
of that
right.
as well. Yep. Okay,
And
thank
next
you.
year's taxes, next year's levy would be based upon this current levy, which is,
Yes, the levy,
the levy itself will be based on.
not necessarily the
The
rate,
levy is whatever we vote at town meeting.
right, which will be,
The levy limit automatically goes up. It has nothing to do with
But
this year's.
we levy effectively at the limit.
We don't have to.
We don't, that's true.
right.
But I think going back, the last time we were more than $10,000 under the limit, I think was like 7 years ago or something like that. It's a while back. I looked at the
Only
numbers.
because the voters approved that.
Well, the voters approve it because that's what's put forward.
Yeah.
I'm just
Again,
saying.
I'm not looking to argue that point tonight. But theoretically, if we were to do, if this year's practice were to be based on past practices, I think we understand each other that it's based on the current levy, not the effects of abatements.
Right.
So, okay,
But I
thank you
think
very
the
much.
key thing is the levy limit has nothing to do with assessments.
Yes.
Nothing.
Right, only
It is
the-
just
only the-
automatically
right.
updated every year by 2.5% plus new growth.
Plus debt.
So, but I have a question to clarify too, which I've been thinking about a little bit, is, so for the abatements, are those a permanent change in assessed value of a property? Is it a permanent adjustment? Is this a one-time, one-year adjustment? Are we gonna have abatement requests every year? Potentially?
Disclaimer, I'm not an assessor. But, so next year is our reval year, so that's basically a deeper dive into the data as far as, and that gets certified to the Department of Revenue. So, valuations are never static.
Yeah.
It's gonna be based on a lot of different factors and information, which is updated annually. So in a reval year, though, you're really certifying that, that all the factors are correct, and, if there's any clarification needed, fine tuning that data.
So because that year is coming up, that deep dive year, this is probably a one-year problem?
I don't want to hypothesize
Not
on that.
necessarily,
Yeah.
yeah. Because the next year's values are gonna be based on 2022's sales. We were still skyrocketing up in property values.
Okay.
It wasn't until very late 2022 that we started to actually kind of crest over that and flatten out. So I'm concerned that to your point, Peter, I'm concerned that, yes, it's contained to an extent, but the valuations next year potentially could go through the roof again, because how many houses sold that sold for way more? I know there were houses on my road that sold for way more than they're worth. But they sold last year.
It's worth what someone pays for it. I think.
Exactly. So I personally am pessimistic about it. I don't think we're limited to a 1 year. I think we're gonna sit through a multi-year issue here.
Wait, when you, multi-year issue on what? On abatements or on there being
On people's tax bills coming out
higher than what they
much
think they
higher
should?
than what they should have been, or what they were historically, or higher than, even a 20% overall growth being far higher than the average of the town. Being in that 0.5% of the bell curve.
I mean, I think what we're really talking about is you have a relative change in valuation that is dramatic. And it might be persistent, though. And it might show up again. I think what we're saying is it might show up again next year. We might have another multiple hundred abatements, potentially.
I would say, though, that if you go through a deep dive and an accurate assessment of what a house is valued at, and it's across the board on all properties, then there should be little chance that the abatement is approved.
Well, and I guess.
I mean, if people dislike this process, it's not to take out on the town or the assessors or anyone else. It's Beacon Hill. You guys gotta go to Beacon Hill, because they set up the way we tax property, and we're able to raise taxes, within the town. It's all formula driven. It's no different than Chapter 70 or any of these other, how we pay into the vocational schools. All these formulas maybe don't make sense anymore. Maybe they're not fair and equitable. Maybe they are. But it's Beacon Hill that sets all this stuff on it. So, if there is outrage to have on the system, I think the outrage should be poured towards our representatives, and that's, the right way to address it. There's a lot of people following a process, that's set out, and maybe there was a mistake in it. Maybe a balloon year puts this equation kind of out of control, right? But this is the system Massachusetts elected to have to raise revenues.
Well, again, it's a 42-year-old system now.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Perhaps
yeah.
it needs to be tweaked. I agree. March 7th. You'll have 3 of them here. You can ask them all you want.
Yeah, I mean, and for anyone listening to this, and for, March 7th, when we're with the legislators, I mean, I would plan to ask these questions to them, and if anyone wants to send, correspondence to me or anyone else on the board, I'm sure we would help, bring forward those concerns and raise those questions to the legislators as well.
Any other discussion?
No.
All right. All right, moving on, that brings us to minutes. We have I believe January 26th? Yes, January 26th minutes got loaded up yesterday. Did anybody get a chance to read through them yet? I have not.
I
Have not.
Okay, let's kick it for next meeting.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I just realized while you guys were talking that I made a mistake on the minutes and the fire alarm. I think I put primary school, so what I'm going to do is fix that instead of elementary school. So I'll fix that anyway, so don't read them yet. I'll send you another email when I edit them.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, thanks.
All right, committee reports. I shortened it because we haven't had too many lately, so does anyone have any committee reports to report?
Just sewer. I watched a little bit of the video they met the other night, the general budget discussion.
Okay. Anything from parks? We haven't had a parks update in a while.
I've been on vacation, and so hasn't the Parks member I usually talk to. I don't think that there's anything. Are they out with the RFI for the design and?
No, they're finalizing that and working on doing this schematic design
Yep.
in front of that.
For Marshall Park.
Mhm.
Not that I'm assigned to it, though. I did watch the ZBA last night, the other, impending budget-related item that's going on in town, the 40B, Pond View. Both sides agreed to kind of, I'm going to say this may be wrong, but pause where we are right now and bring to the hack, and potentially further than that, depending upon the outcome of it, whether the ZBA actually has authority to act for the legislative bodies of sewer and water, as well as to force municipal agreements with Fitchburg and in Leominster. So that's kind of on pause. Honestly, if I had to guess, it's probably going to be on pause for quite a while. But, and then they agreed on timelines as to when that decision comes back, it's 90 days or 120 days, depending upon the outcome, to continue that process, so.
Any other reports? Excellent. Topics for future meetings, other than maintaining capital plan and tax assessment and abatements and upcoming budgets? Any other requests or topics anyone would like to discuss?
So we probably should put on maybe you said it, the legislative.
Yes.
If we.
So we have meetings, we'll have 3 meetings in between now and then. All of them are budget meetings. But we could certainly fit something in there, I'm sure.
I would at least have it on the agenda in case we want to
Yeah.
have a topic on it, like old business or something like that.
All right. Is there any final public comment from the committee? Any public comment from the public?
Rhonda Lucio, 181 Reservoir Road. I just came down here to express my opinion on using the pavement management plan to fund the snow and ice deficit. I voted in favor of both the pavement management plan and the debt exclusion that went along with it. Part of my reasoning behind, I'm not one who would take a debt exclusion lightly. Part of my thought process was that the town was committing a certain amount of funds to the roads every year. That was what they were committing to. So I agreed to approve the debt exclusion. And now when there's economic uncertainty, excuse me, the first place we're going to pull funds from is the pavement management plan. I disagree with this completely. I think that the ARPA funds, if you listen to what was said earlier, the trucks being on, the supply chain issues with the vehicles and the inflation due to COVID, this is something that should be funded out of ARPA, not the pavement management plan. And I know the town manager has no say over ARPA, but I would be totally against using any funds from the pavement management plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a follow-on question. The transfer of money is approved by us or from one budget to the other, or by the select board? Or do you not need approval because it's within a similar?
That's within the same budget. It would be considered,
Interdepartment?
you're right.
Okay, so it's your call.
I don't want to say, we've never had
You
to cover
you don't
that
have to have
large
any,
amount, but.
you don't have to have a
typically-
board or vote to transfer that fund.
Yeah, if it were, between different departments, outside of that, it would require a vote. End of the year transfers by finance and select board. Karen can jump in if she so.
I think she's off the call already.
Okay.
And is there anything that's not going to be done with that pavement management budget that would have been planned between now and the end of the fiscal year?
So like I said, the updated pavement management plan has been created by the group that we hired to do the LiDAR. There were, I think, 2 roads on there that we wouldn't be able to cover as far as, but a lot of the items were the fog line painting, which there were a number of roads on that, which don't, the aggregate amount wasn't that much that we would still be able to, we expect those would all get done, but it would be the 2 larger projects.
Okay, and will we see that plan as
But
part
I
of it?
can't, yeah, I want to reserve, if we could use Chapter 90 funds instead for those projects, but that's kind of a larger discussion.
That pavement management plan that we just received, is that going to be part of the DPW budget presentation? Will we see that at some point here?
I can most certainly ask him to include that, and I did talk to the chair of the select board about him doing a presentation on that soon.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone online?
No. Just Amanda and me. Upcoming meetings. Next week kicks off budget season. We will have our town manager budget presentation. Mr. Menard will be running the meeting. I will not be here. But we will certainly have that meeting. And then we have on the 23rd, the following week, Council on Aging, Land Use, and Library. The following week, March 2nd, we will have the police and fire presentations as well. I am going to circulate our document that we went over a couple meetings ago to the department heads, just to give them a last minute, but at least a shortly before the presentations reminder as to what we would request for presentations. Specifically, last year they did great with getting us the presentations more than 48 hours in advance so that we have a chance to go through them. And I highly suggest that everyone does go through them so you're more prepared with questions and whatnot. And that's, yeah, we'll go from there. Again, March 7th, it's the select board meeting with the school committee and the finance committee and our delegates, Senator Cronin and Representatives Kuzmarek and Scarsdale. So I suggest anyone in the public that would like to discuss anything that's going on specifically related to these issues to stop on by. With that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Excellent. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.